present Susanne Maria Weber from University of Marburg. And she has a special position in my academic career, actually, because I was in Marburg with the AD scholarship for a year, thanks to her. And when we decided to organize this conference, she was the first one that I invited as a keynote, and she accepted it. It's really great to host you here. And I will tell a little about her bio. You can easily find her CV and writings everywhere, maybe. And she is quite well known in the field of organizational education. I think what makes her studies unique is her somehow, still I admire her, and I cannot sometimes get the connections she's making with Foucault, with Bourdieu, with Marx sometimes, with Michael Peters, and with educational sciences, with organizational transformation, with social transformation. And this is a unique thing for me, because when I first came to Marburg, you remember I was in this position like, okay, we should have this Humboldt tradition university, and now the neoliberal university is destroying everything, how we will resist and do something about it. But you changed my perspective. While still defending the values of the traditional modern university, we need to look for alternatives against the dominant paradigms. And this is not a one-way step or one-way direction, and you opened my mind there. And that's why I decided that you should be here speaking today to open our minds from under this uncertainty issues, crisis issues, how to handle this in a more diverse, paradigmatic way, let's say. So, welcome back, welcome again, and the floor is yours.
Merhaba, günaydın. And sorry, there it ends. I can't do more than just 2 or 3 words of Turkish. Sorry for that. I need to do English. Thank you so much for inviting me and having me. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here very much. It's such a warm and welcoming atmosphere. And thank you so much. And very touching that what you're saying, that it has been like interesting place for you to be in Marburg. So I'm very happy that Marburg could offer some inspiration. I think academia should be a space of inspiration. And I hope I can contribute a little bit for this conference to inspire as well, bring a little bit of Marburg spirit, hopefully, as well. And yeah, maybe it can be helpful for you here to reflect on the future. We listened already to the rector's speech of all the different perspectives in the future, so happy to contribute here. I just set my watch here to be like not talking too long here. Good. So, very happy to talk to this topic, and uncertainty actually is everywhere. I mean, Dewey already said uncertainty, you can't avoid it. I mean, we always search and long for certainty so much, but actually you won't find it in that sense. The life is about uncertainty anyway, so that was already Dewey's one of his core messages, so we're there, right? Good. I would like to introduce a little bit the topic from a Foucauldian lens today, so power critical perspectives, and I would really do like a journey for you today, bringing like the Foucauldian lens of not to be governed like this and in such a way, defending truth, contesting power, imagining the common university. So I will give a little bit the story from empirical trends in higher education, what we can see, what we're facing there, but then take a little bit the methodological perspective from Foucauldian lens and see what could it mean to us today, how could we go further, especially under conditions where nowadays, and maybe we could reinvent as well the university for the future and commoning in university style. Well, let's see whether that can be helpful. And of course, nothing is easy, but still there is potential. Okay, if we think what has happened in the last, I don't know, 30, 40, 50 years, or even hundreds of years, we've been going through this traditional modern idea of this solidarity and independence idea of the Humboldtian University. It was, of course, very much discussed in the German sphere to the modern sciences and this idea of the individual independent researcher. And then over the 20th century, we've been going through a period of growth, of massive growth. The universities, number of universities been rising enormously, students, professorships, everything. And then we've, of course, very shortly, I'm just starting with this here, we've been going through things like neoliberal shifts, excellence strategies, as well gender mainstreaming has been, of course, relevant parts. And so since the 90s, 95, something, turning entrepreneurial was very much in topic at a global scale, and very much debates in academia has been taking place on the topic of becoming an entrepreneurial university. Well, actually, when I looked into Germany, I must say, at the same time, we're becoming much more bureaucratical. Interestingly, very interesting combination of we should be entrepreneurial, but actually at the same time, we're becoming much more bureaucratic, which is kind of quite contradictory. So see, that's interesting combination here. But what we're facing nowadays is maybe really the most not only puzzling but alarming trend is that we're going authoritarian so much, and that is shifting discourses in science and academia. And this is unfortunately global trends, and we will start with this a little bit here. And that's where we're going in the academic world. And at the same time, we see, don't worry, we're not going in detail here too much. At the same time, we are facing multi-crisis if we look into a situation of our planet, into all the challenges we should need to face and address, and what we really would need to focus on. So Otto Scharmer from MIT Boston, I really think he's very much from an educational perspective, interestingly, and they say we would need to lead from an emerging future. We would need to really see how we do path creation, what we do here, where are we going, and how do we produce future? Every second, every minute is like, what is future in 1 minute is presence already in the next minute. So what should we do here? And they're mentioning all the multiple crises we see here: climate, energy, poverty, water, health, food, financial security, education, leadership, civilization, spirituality. All these things are relevant here, and they're differentiating different modes of governance, rationalities and logics, which are not just past or present or future, but which are co-present at the same time. And I think such analytical differentiations can help us to see where are we actually and what's happening. And sometimes it's really mingling and mixing quite a bit. So there in the first line, they say, well, that is a little bit the free market capitalism idea. And actually with the neoliberal idea, we've been there very much going into this market competition idea, education being a commodity and all these things. So that would be like this rationality here of the free market. The second, the idea of the stakeholder capitalism, of regulation, of unions, of proprietary systems, of stakeholder awareness maybe, but still of this, it's about you need to regulate the relationships. But they would suggest definitely here, Karma and Schäuble would say, we would need to go for intentional ecosystem economy and renewal in a cross-sectoral approach, and to really interconnect and to go for collective action, common attention and will. So there we see this quite educational here. So that's what they suggest. We should definitely take into account the common as well, common property rights thing about the earth here as well. So ecosystem awareness would then be crucial. As I said, I'm not going too deep into here. I just wanted to mention the challenges. On the one hand, we have the trends in academia. On the other side, we have the multi-crisis and challenges and different rationalities which are on the way. So what we will be talking about the next 40 minutes is not to be governed like this in such a way, Foucauldian quote. So I would first start with a little bit of empirical work on inter-authoritarian governance in higher education in a global scale. We would take a little bit of a look into Foucauldian perspective. What does it mean to be not to be governed like this in such a way? We would dive back into Greek and Roman world of what he did in genealogical perspective to see paresia, speaking truth to power, but well, how you do that, especially when being in quite difficult conditions, and we will see more there. So commoning might be an alternative to step out this relation of being oppressed and to react against that, commoning to think newly, think academia and higher education freshly, maybe from radical imagination into this heliotropic practice. So heliotropic would be like the sunflower turning to the sun and see what could be really giving strength and what could give energy as well and vitality. So imagine the commoning universities. Then the last part, the pattern approach, we will be introducing a little bit of what we have been doing or what we are doing in a European Union project where we focus on the commoning and the commoning university. We're as well exploring with our students together, and I'm going to introduce a little bit into that. So that will going into this part, what you can do Monday morning after the conference, what you can start doing. So it's not just a theoretical contribution here, but as well quite practical at some point in the end. Hopefully helpful. Thank you. Good. Now, starting with the first part, which is not that funny, because it's about authoritarian governance in higher education. This is obviously a fact rising as a problem of many countries and states. Especially we could see that, of course, in the news in the USA very much. We had all these massive problems. We could see that the most influential universities is quite struggling at the moment, be it the Columbia, be it MIT, Boston, Harvard, UCLA. All of them are really, really forced to bow their heads, and they're resisting quite impressively. So what we see, this is quite a bit of a rise of authoritarianism there. Anti-democratic trends, we can observe them, and there is a strong dismantling foundation of democratic institutions in the USA, surprisingly, because we always thought institutions are so stable and you can't ruin them that quickly. So everybody's surprised how fast and speedy institutions can be put into ruins. So that is really, of course, very, very bad news. So contesting legal rights, professional autonomy, academic freedom as a professional and legal right is at risk here, and the autonomy and authority of professors to do research, to express views in public without suppression is, of course, critical here in a global scale. So academic freedom, of course, it is so important. It's a foundational principle of our legal and institutional frameworks. It's essential to the function of higher education institutions, and academic freedom is so important, and you can't miss it for knowledge advancement and the public good. So actually we desperately need free universities here. But we see the global attack on academic freedom. Some authors refer to policing higher education scholars. We saw that with the Gaza, Palestine, and Israeli conflicts, but many other topics out there. Students and staff surveyed with cameras and facial recognition software, police zip-tying and arresting students during protests. I think you have some experience here as well during the last month already here in Istanbul, for example. We saw that as well all in the news. Limiting free speech, curriculum control, denial of tenure for outspoken faculty. This is all effects, and even putting people in prison, of course, this is happening too. Universities as epicenter of ideological warfare is what is analyzed here in the relevant literature, and declining academic freedom is going on. So examples are USA, Brazil, Hungary, even Germany, where we have the AfD right-wing party, not in governance happily so far, but very much pushing to shape the public discourse in society. So India, Philippines, so many countries out there, educational conflicts are there. And still the vital role of universities there to foster social responsibility and combating this global drift towards authoritarianism. So there is already, as we see, there is a challenge out there, the academic freedom index. So obviously, academic freedom nowadays is something to be indexed, to be monitored, to be protected, definitely. And there is the academic freedom index update in 25. Actually, it's a project funded by the Volkswagen Stiftung, the German funding institution, and it's an Erlangen project together with the Swedish university. So they do this indexing researching, and they found a strong connection between being anti-democratic or anti-pluralist parties in government and lower levels of academic freedom. So that's what they could observe clearly, that there is a strong connection to the political influencing academic freedom very clearly. They do this overview over 179 countries. They compare to different time slots, 10 years, 50 years, and yearly as well. And they see declining academic freedom in 34 countries, but there's hope 8 countries show a rise of academic freedom too. So there is multiple different conditions as well. So clearly, they observed as well, of course, anti-pluralist trends in Argentina, Poland, but Poland is not much getting better now, happily. So they observed that Poland has been going down and now it's going up, happily. Maybe you will tell something else, I don't know. Our colleague who do the speech this afternoon will tell us more. But the USA definitely, for sure. So now, diving a little bit deeper, so we saw that there is obviously an influence from the political side, clearly, but the question is, what is happening in academia, in the higher education world? So do academic studies politicize students? Is that necessarily the case? And of course, in many ways, we found that students are the ones who want to drive forward and really go for the streets, and they go for protesting, and there has been always many activities from students, but not necessarily this is obviously the case. So one panel of a German university, they did a study and they're showing that not necessarily do students become more willing to participate, to engage in participatory behavior. Not necessarily the university contributes to that. So they could see that they did not become more politicized in their case study of the university there during their studies. Than they had already been before. So that is, of course, family socialization. You find a broad range there of difference. With the Bourdieuian perspective, you see, well, there is different social backgrounds, of course, and you will see there is a lot of difference out there of of course, if you grow up in an intellectual left-wing family, that's different than others. So clearly there's difference out there, but the university did not contribute, obviously, here to that. And worse, as well, the case of Germany, there is another case of the University of Siegen, where they did an analysis saying, actually, in the field of teacher training, unfortunately, we observe that students develop something like narcissistic, authoritarian, orientational patterns. This is weird. We would not hope to have that. And so we saw that is really an issue to address. There is a current social character shifting, obviously. So there is some socialized, latent, narcissistic, authoritarian attitudes. That's what these authors are finding. And that needs to be recognized and addressed in teacher training, because, of course, teachers will be spreading all over the place in any school and any school system. They will be relevant. And if their orientational patterns are like this, what can you expect then to happen from kids? So we need to raise awareness. They said we should do democracy or education not only at an intellectual level, but we should go for aesthetic approaches, whole body learning approaches to really make clear, how does it feel to be excluded? Just feel it yourself, what it means, and then maybe you will think differently. Something like this they're suggesting. They say we need to follow the democratically constituted educational mandate here. And of course, unfortunately, the case of Turkey is there too. So there is relevant literature in the field saying that we have political patronage. So the culture of universities, not necessarily, not only the case of Germany is here, but this as well here, we could see that higher education is not necessarily a threat to authoritarian regimes. At the cultural higher education level, universities could contribute as well to nationalist indoctrination. Elite reproduction, most universities anyway do elite reproduction if we're serious. I mean, that happens in Germany, unfortunately, too. Class inequality is relevant everywhere, too, unfortunately. But nationalist indoctrination, of course, that is something definitely to take into account here more. And that is the analysis of this work here to intensify and consolidate authoritarian rule. So in this sense, universities would be functional to extend political patronage to new clientele, and it would fortify control on coercion among students and academics. And let me move to another case here, which is the case of India. So we see there's really a broad range of different variations as well here, where we could see, and they talk about the carceral state and struggles of academic freedom in India. They would say, actually, in this system, you have the caste system, you have religious nationalism of caste, supremacist political ideologies, and this caste oppression combines with neoliberal capitalism, with state repression, and this is the carcerality, so like ideas behind bars, they say it's really producing social, political, and epistemic exclusion. And of course, education needs to have a critical role here. So they say the prison is a broader system of carceral governance that relies on carceral methods for controlling the most marginalized sections of its population. Prisons, they say as well, are spaces of intellectual resistance, knowledge production, and solidarity building. So there is always hope. Don't forget hope. So, but one thing what we have at the global scale as well is algorithmic authoritarianism, which of course makes life even more difficult, because there we can see that control can be really done everywhere and every second, because it consolidates institutional control across education, warfare, digital discourse, and you can have this architecture of algorithms mediating judgment, obscuring accountability, and constraining moral and epistemic agency. So the digital world, and especially AI, is, of course, a factor which increases risk there. Now, what can Foucault help us with in this empirical analysis, which is unfortunately not too happy to tell about, but still relevant and important, right? So Foucault was saying us not to be governed like this and in such a way is so important. Michel Foucault, very important author, a French political philosopher, thinking about exclusion and institutionalized exclusion in many ways, the birth of the clinic, the prison. We will see some of it a little bit in a minute. And he was saying we should not limit our critique to the institution. So if we just say, oh, this is our institution, or this is another institution, we would be limiting the critique level, and we should not do that. We should dive deeper, because we need to ask, how are these power relations rationalized? So to really go to the root of how could this institution exist? What is the knowledge? What's the power knowledge behind it or below it, let's say? To pose this question is the sole way that hinders other institutions to take their place with the same goals and the same effects. So I think many of you might know this panopticon, which is very well known, an example, Foucault's work of discipline and punish, and how in history the style of disciplining and punishing people is changing, very relevant. And this panopticon style is showing how people are disciplined, and so easily having a watchman in the middle of this new social reformist style of prison, and you can observe any cell in there, so all the prisoners will know I can be observed at any moment, so that will control, of course, very much their behavior too. So the panopticon idea is very much in a digital world, of course. It's present, it's not just past, it's quite relevant in the surveillance world there. And it has been established in so many ways, it has been replicated in so many ways, and it's really present in our societies quite a bit. So what would Foucault tell us what critique could be and what critique could help us with? So saying not to be governed like this in such a way and not like this, to reverse the relations by an enlightenment-oriented critique. We already heard enlightenment from the different speeches we had here, and the rector and as well, Yadin, were referring to these relevant important points, right? Thank you so much for that. So Foucault would say the art of not being so much governed refers to the will to oppose unreflective obedience, because maybe sometimes we are not using the space we still could use, and we should maybe play out this more. So not accepting as true what an authority says it's true or prescribes, paying attention to the relations between power, truth, and the subject, and to desubject maybe day by day, a little bit, step by step, to go for an enlightened and critical attitude. And Foucault, in an interview, said, my role, and that is too emphatic a word, is to show people that they are much freer than they feel, that people accept as truth, as evidence, some themes which have been built up at certain moment in the history. And this so-called evidence can be criticized and destroyed. All my analyses are against the idea of universal necessities in human existence. So that is quoted from Peters, very well-known, important educational philosopher from New Zealand, who is very much a Foucault expert and very much expert in the field of higher education studies, has been doing a brilliant online encyclopedia of higher education. I would definitely recommend to dive into this very nice resource for you. So paresia is as well jumping back into the Greek and Roman world, again Foucauldian take, going into genealogical sources. Where does the story start? Truth-telling has been a practice of the Greek world and of the Roman world as well, saying as an educational practice of the self. So paresia is very much connected to an ethics of subjectivity, and Foucault, of course, observes and analyzes the changing notion of truth and the changing practice of education in the socio-political sphere. So truth-telling is very much connected to educational ethics and practices, because the Greek fathers, at that point, they don't ask for the girls, but they just ask how to educate the sons. So unfortunately, women were not relevant at that point in time. So they were asking, how should we educate our sons? And Socrates was, of course, the paradiesiastes of the Greek society. So Socrates was telling them, you need to educate them to become paradiesiastes and to be speaking out frankly. So paresia is an ethical way of life, a mode of existing in the world. So to be making clear what you believe, to be connecting, to know the truth and to convey it to others, and to work with your moral courage, even if there's a risk of danger in telling the truth. And paresia is linked in that way to criticism, and so to tell the truth as moral and ethical duty there. Socrates, as we know, has been paradiesiastes. Unfortunately, he was paying this with his life as well. If you remember, that was a very bad story. Speaking freely, because he said what he says accords exactly with what he thinks, and what he thinks accords exactly with what he does. So he's very much a consistent person at what doing and saying connected. So truth-telling is, in a way, root of our academic cultural practice, because academia is the space of truth-telling. We as academics want to be finding the truth, so that has been really the foundation of the whole academic world of our modern times. So there is the roots of what we want to be anyway in academia, isn't it? So this is shaping our subjectivity as researchers, and is relevant for, as well, what we want to be in higher education. Education for democracy, and to do educating as a living practice into democratic spaces there. So applied professional ethics is relevant for us in academia and higher education. So, but is it all about critique only? And what do we do with like this standpoint if you don't want to be put in prison or lose your life or lose your tenure or whatever effects will be there? We know that's really real. I mean, the index gives for Turkey, and it's between 0 and 1. For Turkey, the Academic Freedom Index gives you a 0.12 rate, and the Germany rate is at 0.88. So we are lucky in Germany to talk about truth-telling, actually. Very easy to talk about truth-telling in that rate compared to the one we're facing. So very clearly, don't get me wrong, I'm just trying to raise a point here. And I'm wanting to say that paresia cannot be just only about speaking freely and frankly, but maybe finding alternatives in how to address things. And maybe commenting could be an alternative, what we see here. So let's think into this one. So anyway, there is a debate in the field that we should ask our imagination, and some authors say we should not only refer to what the university can be. So we should ask what the university can be. We should not ask what it cannot be. So in a critical sense, to be deconstructing the limitations, what we cannot do, or what it ought to be from an idealistic approach, but we should tap into the existing academic practices and flesh out future possibilities to make new beginnings for the university and the potential rising here. So they suggest post-criticality and the pursuit of an empirical philosophy of education. They would say we could move beyond deconstruction, and we should explore affirmative, engaged methodologies that prioritize proximity to educational practices over detached critique, especially when we remember what the case was in Germany, the authoritarian shifts and students' orientational patterns, or that the academic higher education field does not really help to become like democratic citizen. So something to take into account maybe here. So how post-critical methodologies could foster meaningful connections between theory and practice, that's what they're asking. And interestingly, the UNESCO, the institution of the United Nations, of course, has been taking up this point of rethinking education. They have been criticizing a strong shift to the market world in higher education, or in education in general. They've been criticizing to say inequality is rising at a global scale. So we should do something against that. So UNESCO is taking the standpoint here, say, let's not think about the public good only, because the public is related to nation and to state, but let's think about and detach a little bit from that, because especially in times of the shifts we are facing, maybe nation state is not helping too much at some point. Maybe we should shift into the common good perspective, and maybe that could help us to dive deeper here, and that's what we're doing next. So coming from a radical imagination to heliotropic practice, as I said, the sunflower turns the head to the sun and sees what could we do here, what gives life, what is life-giving forces. And so early works here has been working, Andre Pusey and others, just giving some glimpses of the debate, and my colleague here, Christian Schadowski, has been his expert in the field. Actually, he's been doing so much brilliant work in there, so he should give this speech, actually. He will do brilliant work afterwards later. But there is early work here about the abolition of the university toward the University of the Common. So that was based on student protests when the bachelor-master system, the Bologna reform, was established in 2010. Everywhere we had student protesting so much at that point in time, as well in Germany, everywhere. And they were reimagining the university based on really bottom-up student protesting, how to come up with a really open university, and that paper is about that. And of course, there's much work done in this field. So other perspectives would say, actually, we should go against and beyond this market economy, and we should put the gift economy against that. So the regime of the public good should be shifting to the common good, and as well to the idea of the free universities. And there is a recent rise of free universities as well, not only of market universities, and to strengthen the gift-like character of education. And now my colleague Christian Schadowski has been working on the field of commoning as well, for the higher education world, mapping the field very nicely there on the common good, the commons, and the common. I'm not going too deep into that because I was expecting we'll talk about that later. So giving really some dimensions here of ontology, so the politics, the ownership, governance, benefits, and finance, and to give like this a systematic view of higher education through the lenses of the common. And as well, by this, designing alternatives for higher education. Sorry. Interestingly, as well, for the whole field of education, as well for the school, the well-known educational philosopher Stephen Ball, who has been educational philosopher as well consultant of the British Labour Party as well as the British government, trying to reform the educational system, and together with a colleague, Collet Zabé, he's Barcelona, in education as well, brilliant colleague there. So they say commoning and commons could be an alternative episteme for education. So we should leave this modern episteme of education behind. It's still based on this rationality of like the bringing like a production belt, like bringing students in, like batches of students, bringing them in, putting them on the belt and putting them out, and well, selecting them on the way, of course, as well. But it's still the logic of production belt, what we're doing in our academic and as well in our school institutions. So that's why they said, in the first paper, they said against school. So old critique on against schooling. There, Ivan Illich, all the classics they took up against schooling. Then the second paper, they said beyond school. So we should go beyond that with this episteme of commoning. And the third one, they're saying without school. So how can we reinvent our educational system and just do without school, do something else? And that they suggest this episteme of commoning quite interestingly. And I think we can make use of this maybe as well for higher education. Let's just think what we could do differently, maybe. And against such enclosured, institutional, and individualistic, market-focused, just individual success ranking, let me be the best and the others will be. And they're arguing, you can't be, it's not inclusive, it will not ever be inclusive because it's all about selection anyway. So that's the sociological critique very clearly here, right? So it's all about decontextualize, it's just about like putting knowledge in heads and so on. And all what we do here is not helping anyway for the crisis and the multiple issues we need to manage today and all the challenges. We're not at 1.5 degrees of global warming. We are 2 and 3 degrees now in the meantime. Well, so that's difficult. So they say maybe we should think about the relational onto epistemology here. We should think about common education as an open activity, as a relational thing, as an equal relation, as a place-based, as a contextual education where diversity is fruitful and you make use of, and the logic would go for the common good and it would be about self-formation. We have listened to this as well in the speech very much of the rector as well, and you were mentioning the self-formation of the self, of the others, of the community and the environment to create new ways of being and living. So maybe that would be then the most important choice, how to live together. Because at the moment it's so difficult to live together at a global scale. But we're not doing well, really. See all the wars around, not working. So maybe that would be something we should strive for, to go for the commoning activity here. So commoning could then be an alternative episteme for education as well for higher education. And maybe it could even help us with this problematizing I did at the beginning with the authoritarian shifts we see at a global scale, because then we would not connect that strongly to nation and state, but more to civil society, more to spaces which could help us to be freer in what we work here. The commons as a living social structure in which humans deal with their common problems in a self-organized way could be an alternative mode here. And the commoning is the practice, of course, Jeronium always gives you the practice. So commoning as a practice of cultivating and caring for the relationships that exist around the production of shared resources. So commoning as a process and way how the great transformation can succeed. We saw this big template there of all the multi-crises. So maybe commoning could be a way how to do that. Not easy way, of course, but possible. So Christopher Alexander, very interesting person because he was an architect suggesting that we should build our cities based on patterns. And he was saying, very easy to understand, people like to have light, not only from one side. Normally we have windows at one side. And he said, well, let's make an architectural pattern to have light from both sides. So people like it much better to have light from both sides, from two sides. So that is a pattern, very easy. So cool pattern, actually. We like light. Everyone likes light, right? So he would say patterns is a tool to support liveliness, to go, it's very flexible, it's applicable to many different contexts and settings if you have such elements that will contribute to a language. So any pattern can come and become a language when you interconnect all these patterns, and then it will help you to go for successful problem solution. So always the old Greek world had already the eupraxia, the eupraxie in German. So that is in the American or English-speaking word, the best practice, and in you have as well discourse here on good practice, right? You work a lot on good practice as well. So that is actually the idea behind it. What is good practice? Which are things which are working, and how could we combine them, bring them together, and make this and create the world based on this step by step? Actually, very much think we could find a Dewey as well, interestingly. So, describe and practice a successful problem solution which would appear and compare a context, and then you have always the interplay of context, problem, and solution, and it would work to work with this. And they have, this commoning idea, they have the threefold notion of democracy as well. Interestingly, very much connecting to Dewey's thought of will, because on the one hand, it's about social togetherness, so the immediate social relations we're living. The second is political self-governance, like peer governance, and the third one refers to the economy as care economy. So interestingly, Dewey is well known for in education as an education philosopher, as an expert of experience-based learning, and of course art and aesthetic-based as well learning, but as well of radical democracy theory as the one or arguing for the co-creation there very much, but he's not received so far as actually a care economist, interestingly, but he's been writing about that. So we need to do more in this field, interestingly. So that's the threefold notion of democracy to be found here. And the Commoning World goes for that. Silke Helfrich is an author. She has been going for 400 interviews worldwide. She has been searching for patterns, and she found 33 patterns as a start of commoning. And she has been developing image language card deck, and based on these 400 interviews, which goes back on the work of Ellen Ostrom, on the work of Alexander, and she works together with this American activist, Bollier, as well, who's an interesting blog as well to tell. So commoning would go for be at equal footing and to develop trust, because if it's about speaking at same eye level, you need as well to go for building trust, and that could be supported by the pattern language of commoning as well. So here is the four dimensions: social togetherness, political self-governance, care economy, and the fourth one will be developed now, connectedness to nature, of course, as well relevant. So here is the card deck you will be seeing very quickly. This is now in transformation. Here is literature, free, fair, and alive, the ensured power of the commons, which might be of interest for you. And for us, of course, relevant for the higher education world to reflect on own governance would be one of the patterns which would be relevant here. So what we have been doing with this card deck in our research project, it's a European Union funded research project, ASSET, Aesthetic and Embodied Learning for Democracy. We already learned that democracy education should not be limited to be like telling people about political parties and so on, but really see at an experiential basis, how could we transform ourselves here? So how have we been using this pattern approach, and we have been experimenting with it and seeing that this shifts attention from self-focus to the whole. So against an ecosystem idea, to go into an ecosystem perspective, to engage visual imagination, to redirect our consciousness, to support deep reflection, to articulate experience and process, and as well to support, to become co-creators with the system, to explore collective imaginaries in transformation, and to clarify as well the transformation taking place. Actually, we've been exploring with this as well for organizational development, for developing projects, so that you can use it in so many ways. Quite interesting, this pattern card deck. We have it here actually for one's interested. You can show it as well. We've translated this into English and will be available soon as well. So there you see the picture of what students have been doing in one of our classes where we have been developing how would the Commoning University look like, and that is the new design patterns here. And they were talking about commoning learning, not a consumer perspective as being in higher education, but being a care user. What would it be about finance? Because of course, without finance, life is much more difficult, very clearly, you need finance. And then as well, what is about governance, about internal processes, what would we do? And so very quickly, I give you a little bit of some elements, some patterns they saw as relevant. So as a Commoning University, they said, it would be distributed structures. It's not top-down only. It's like, so everybody like in a hierarchic way it's not about being forced to do things, but to contribute freely. It's to use convivial tools like this pattern language tool here. We could use that. It's about preserve relationships, even being in conflicts, because that's what we usually do when we are in conflict. We split apart. We say, "Oh, they're really mean. They're really bad. We don't talk to each other anymore." That's what we usually do in our relationships, and any relationship as well with our really dear ones, right? In general, we do it. So that's a suggestion to preserve relationships in addressing conflicts. And so that is the part going very quickly a little bit into learning. We could see some patterns students regarded as very core and relevant: to reflect on your peer governance, to trust situated knowing, to speak from the position you're in, and to really, that is a practice of truth-telling here as well, to really go into this practice of truth-telling bottom-up, because if you don't learn it somewhere, it will not happen anywhere. So this is to go for bring diversity into shared purpose, as well ritualize togetherness, because in an anonymized setting of universities, it's very difficult to connect and to refer to each other and to show empathy and self-responsibility and communication and so on. So many aspects, and make and use together would then be relevant for the learning in such a university very much. So students were suggesting to abolish modular structure. So this is about Bologna process. They were not too happy with the modular structure. They were saying, can we please just leave this behind? And they were saying, we really hate the anonymity we're still facing in our universities. We should be really relating to each other more in order to be partnering, mentoring. Such things would be relevant to organize training. And by this, there would be a cultural development which would raise as well awareness, and which would raise responsibility, and which would raise as a cultural practice to become paresiastes, or maybe as well future designers for our societies, what we definitely need. So they would reclaim universities as a shared space. They would want to learn with and from each other. They would turn away from just the individual to the collective. They would want to establish feedback structures. They would want to have meaningful semester rituals. Actually, in that semester, we started with a dinner together. We invited them for dinner. We said, let's do a dinner together. And they couldn't believe it. But we were there, and they were celebrating dinner, and that was such a different atmosphere then. They loved it. And they said, can we have that always, please? And we said, well, yes, we need all to bring some food then. We cannot do it always. But yeah, we can do it, right? Everybody can bring some food and do like an opening dinner, and then atmosphere is completely different, and trust is rising. And so the relationships are building. So that's really a practice, small thing to do, huge change. So there is potential to really get into touch here. So to go for listening practice very much, because once having such informal settings, listening can take place. In classroom, very difficult to do. So this is the beginning of citizenship education, right? And academic citizenship and higher education citizenship education as well. So the care usership very quickly will be ending soon here. It would be not have the consumerist idea of a student, not just be paying the money, get your, that was as well mentioned, right? Just get your exams and leave and be happy and just get the legitimation to do whatever, but really go, contribute and share, have ownership for what you do, contribute, share knowledge generously, cultivate shared purpose and values, adapt and renew creatively, and to contribute freely again, and to really go for decision-making process, to learn to become democratic decision makers, which is so important. And then point of finance we should not miss out. They were suggesting we should really keep commons and commerce distinct, because it's not about making money or like have a commercial thing here, but it's about sharing the resources to see what is needed and then to distribute accordingly, and to strive for money-independent security. So academia would need to strive for money-independent security in a way based more on civil society, maybe based more on associations, on other forms, and not to be so much dependent from nation and state in the given situation we're in that might be offering help. So internal process as well, very much they would say, well, now, of course, working collectively requires time, and this is always something we see, but we would need to abolish everything which prevents cooperation. And we know that in this over-bureaucratized world, it's so difficult to cooperate. Even interdisciplinary teaching, even interdisciplinary work is really difficult to do if you're not supported by internal process and structures. So rely on hierarchy, share the risk of provisioning, self-monitor compliance with rules would then be a democratic practice in the system, and to as well go for create such thermopermeable membranes around the commons to really protect as well this space would be then something important to establish as internal processes. So that has been, of course, not a completely systematic approach. That has been done by my colleague here, but this has been really bottom-up done by students suggesting, based on this instrument of the pattern card of commoning, what they would want to see and how they could imagine the university as a commoning university. And of course, this is not finished. This is a beginning, and we would be moving forward with this pattern approach to imagining the commoning university. And here is several resources, several approaches, how you could differentiate and what would be all the different dimensions to look at when wanting to develop this commoning university. So sharing, cooperation, bottom-up consensus, decentralization, common responsibility, fairness, plural knowledge production, and reciprocity would be elements of that, of course, very much. And we would see then this instrument of the pattern language, this card deck of, at the moment, 33 cards, they're working on it. Now it will be 40 in autumn, so they're ongoing work of creating more and finding more patterns. They would see it's a collective boundary objects. If you use it, you can express thoughts you could not express before. You maybe have felt it, but you could not tell it, you could not work with it easily. So that could help to build counter spaces. It could help to build counter strategies. And it would shift maybe as well the orders of the gaze from problem, from deficit, from what is lacking and what is not there to potentially opening up the space towards the sun and to go for creating new paths toward alternative universities. You've been working on this as well. Thank you for that. Beyond global blueprints to really do what is like possible and needed as well in the specific cultural space we're in. And then we would go in an organizational educational design research approach, and we would go for organizational democracy as well. And actually, that will not be explained more yet in depth, but I think actually that these patterns are some like micro dispositives in a way, and really they would organize discourse accordingly. Agamben would say the term apparatus, I mean a kind of formation that is at a given historical moment. We have seen the historical moment here, has a major function because the response to an urgency. So maybe the episteme of commoning could be a response to this urgency, and therefore the apparatus here has a dominant strategic function. So maybe this dispositive of commoning could be the response to this urgency. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for this inspiring journey for us. And I'm sure we have